So is it going to be like this forever? Austin Matthews playing with Max Domi and Tyler Bertuzzi?
With Sheldon Keefe, I wouldn't say any line is forever. I don't know that. I don't know that he's ever had a line that he wouldn't deviate from. So I'm not going to say forever, but for now, it looks pretty good. And the best part about it is what it does to the rest of your lineup, right? I mean, it puts weapons. They're going to be so much harder to shut down in the playoffs. It's going to be much harder to. Florida's going to look at it and, okay, Barkov goes up against Matthews, but then, Marner and Nylander should be able to really do some damage to other lines. And this has been a change that people have been calling for in Toronto for, I mean, it's been years, right? And they flirted with this idea, but, with the chemistry that Matthews has with Domi in particular, it feels like you're not taking anything away from Matthews. You're not losing his ability to take over a game. And it's interesting too, because one of the other offshoots of this is Matthews gets a little bit lighter load defensively. He's not being asked to do absolutely everything, which he was for a long part of this season, starting in the defensive zone, getting the top matchup, all that. There's been less of that. And it'll be interesting to see. We'll see if the Tavares line can hold up, but maybe with Marner there, it's going to be able to take more of the defensive load than we expected. And that's the way the Leafs are looking at this is maybe Tavares and Marner are going to be able to take on more of that defensive responsibility.
So I think that's a really, really salient point that not a lot of people have made when talking about this is the pressure that's off his shoulders to be the scoring line and the shutdown line, right? Because that's absolutely a thing. Because when I thought about doing this segment with you, it was more so about actually how the trickle down with the lineup is kind of difficult to me. That's the part of it where I go, oh, this is why it gets hard for me to see it. I actually think that this is going to work in the postseason. Like the Matthews, Domi, Bertuzzi thing, I don't think is a flash in the pan. I don't think it's a regular season byproduct. I like the idea of spreading around the scoring. But every time I do look at the spreading around the scoring, it still feels uncomfortable to me. I'm not reading too much into the sample that we have so far of Tavares and Marner together. It's 3 games, and there has been some good and some meh. But they're also, it's 3 games. But I look at where Nylander is and who he's playing with, and I every time I try to put the pieces together, they still don't feel like they quite fit. And that, to me, is ultimately where it's going to be. Keefe gets the itchy trigger finger, and he decides, well, I got to put Mitch back with Matthews just from a minute standpoint. Like, do you like the way that they're deploying the other guys right now? Because you seem to like the 3 lines, and I do too. But when it comes to playoffs, I don't know how I feel about Nylander trying to drive his own line with a center that can't really score.
Yeah, they're missing a center is the problem. Yeah. But I don't know if putting Domi at third line center necessarily solves that 100% either, right? Like,
no,
I like
you
Domi
have
on
your
the
top
wing,
line, I think. You have your top line. The mystery now is trying to figure out how to make the other middle 6 lineups work, right? Like the other 6 guys, how do you balance those pieces out? That's the mystery.
I guess your stacked line, you could have Nylander on the left wing with Tavares and Marner. I mean, maybe that's something to try. And Nylander does seem like he's getting lost a little bit. Yeah. He's been really quiet the last, I think he has like no goals and 2 assists in 5 games, if I'm remembering correctly. So that's a problem. Like, it's all well and good to spread out your talent on 3 lines, but if one of your second leading scorer and one of your most talented guys isn't producing anymore, then that's a problem for sure. I like the first and second line, and then I'm not really sure what you do with the third line. And it's been interesting that the Kampf line has been a lot better. I mean, they were getting nothing from that line for the first 40 or 50 games. So, there's been some signs of life there too. I think it's important just for Keefe to know he's got different options, because there have been other years they've gone into the playoffs and they've ran very similar lineups for long stretches of time, and they haven't had different looks they can go to. And I think now they have 2 very different looks that they can throw at other teams, and they can even, it looks like they're going to play the Panthers. They can even have different line combinations for when they play the home games versus the road games, just in terms of having last change and having different deployments and stuff like that. And I think knowing Sheldon Keefe, I think he's probably going to do something like that.
Yeah. They're clearly going to move guys around depending on the game situation. But I'm talking like, the majority of the games, what are we going to see? And I'm with you. I feel like Nylander has been a little lost here. I get the temptation of having him on his own line, trying to drive it, because he is a creator, right? And we saw this last year in the postseason too, where he felt like the guy who was just driving play on his own consistently. The zone entries, the playmaking, the shooting. He kind of feels like that fit on the wing that can do this thing. Ultimately, if that could work, I feel like that would have been the most optimal way to do it. Because I don't think that Marner is going to drive a line on his own, right? Like, I don't think that Mitch playing with two guys without elite finish, or at least one guy that doesn't have high-end scoring skills, it feels like a little bit of a waste. So I would say that you probably try this one more game against Detroit, right? Like, take the look against Detroit to see in a more playoff-y style game if you get something from Nylander, like run it out there. But maybe the actual thing to do is just trust that you can throw those three together and it'll work in a playoff game, rather than not losing the opportunity to continue to do it exactly like this for the rest of the regular season.
Yeah, and you've got Yarncroc coming back too, right? So,
well,
I mean, that's going to be...
When do you? Like, I don't... like the.
I was told before the playoffs, or by the play. He's expected for game one, is what I had heard.
Okay. So he is going to be fine.
I don't know if he's going to get into some of these final four games or not, but the expectation was he was going to be back for the playoffs. So...
Would you ever even, like, it sucks too, because they really can't do it. You're so right. You were right about not getting another center. I still don't know if Wenberg would have been the answer, and they were chock full of centers at the deadline. But the one thing I keep coming back to that I would say bothers me is I like the idea of Nylander and Marner together. I actually like the idea of Nylander, fine, whatever, play the left wing, let Marner on the right. But because I like the idea of a Tavares, McMahon, and Nyes line, or Yarncroc on that line, and then bump Nyes down, one of the two. Like, I just like those combinations, but you can't have anybody else playing between the other two guys, right? Like, it doesn't work. So next year, I do think it has to be one of the focuses is get another pivot.
That's what I was going to say. They need more centers on this team. Like, they just don't have a lot of options. Like, camp is so limited. You can't really play them any higher in the lineup, and Holmberg is just really by default, because there's nobody else who can do it. The Leafs have been in a weird situation for years now where they don't have a lot of wingers that can play in the middle. Mm-hmm. I wonder if they should probably experiment trying Marner there at some point, to be honest. I mean, like, especially, I don't know if Tavares is going to stay. I guess we don't even know if Marner is going to stay, but most teams have guys who are left wing / centers, but this team's got lots of guys you don't feel comfortable with playing in the middle at all.
Yeah, the problem is that you can't get cute with it now, right?
No.
Like,
no.
Yeah, try that. No.
Yeah.
Imagine that in the playoffs. They're like, remember Keefe tried to do that against Columbus, where he's like, okay, we're going to do the load-up lines, and we're going to try Nylander in the middle, and then it didn't work, and you were like, ooh, that seemed idiotic. That seemed kind of like a stupid time to try it. And you're like, oh, yeah, but it was a weird year. It was a pandemic year. It wasn't really the playoffs, so who does it really count? It's like, you can't really do that this season where it feels so important.
No, I'm not talking about doing it right now. Yeah. No, I'm just, like, future watch. They just need more offensive players who can play in the middle. So and they tried. Like, they wanted to bring back O'Reilly, and didn't happen. There weren't a lot of centers available in free agency, and they felt like they got a little bit stuck, and that's why there was all that talk in training camp about, Nylander's going to play center this year. Yeah. And they looked at it for 14 seconds. They're like, no, he's not. Yeah. And then it was maybe Fraser Minton, for 4 games. And then it was Holmberg, and it's been kind of a mishmash all year. And I think it's the biggest weakness on this team that doesn't get talked about enough. It feels like the defense gets talked about a lot. And I don't think that the not having 3 quality centers gets talked about enough. No,
you're right, but it does feel like I like tying in early season omens to a year, right? It's just it's fun when it ends up working out. It's probably all BS, but the fact that they started Minton on this team, and then we saw how it actually looked, And we've seen what Minton might actually be after the World Junior Tournament and the year he put together in juniors. It's kind of like, oh, your story season might have been told right there. Like this is a foreshadowing of things to come, is that you started the year with a kid who clearly wasn't ready to play in the NHL in a prominent role for the team. And then you couldn't really address it all year long, and it comes back to bite you in the ass, or it ends up being one of your Achilles heels. No, I think it's a massive priority. I think it's a huge offseason storyline. But yeah, this year I just don't. Every time I try to do this exercise, I have a tough time figuring out what exactly they're going to do. And so part of me just sort of ends up believing, you know what, maybe they do just end up back with the two loaded lines, but that the two loaded lines become Marner and Matthews. And I do wonder what the politicking of this is from Marner's standpoint. Because if I'm him, I'm going like, yes, of course you want to win. Of course you'll do whatever for the team. I don't think that Marner would ever, be going into Keefe's office and saying, oh, I want to be back, or that they're going to be messing with success at this point. Like, they're winning a ton of games. Like, every time they win, you put out the tweet about how successful they've been over the past couple of months. And it's true. Like, they're one of the best teams in hockey. But yeah, at 5-on-5, Matthews and Marner outscored opponents this season 42-24. And that was like with a 55% expected goals. Like, they were really good. This was an incredible season from them. Like, Matthews didn't just get to, being on the precipice of 70 goals on the backs of these two. Like, the vast majority of the work was done with Mitch Marner. And I do wonder, like, if there is some internal pressure the second something goes out the window, or some external pressure or internal pressure, to just kind of reunite these guys so that you feel like you have more of that roster balance by just having it be the simple answer of, hey, well, all these guys are getting the right amount of ice time because we've got all the guys in the right the right two lines. Yeah,
I guess the complication is if you put Marner back there, then it feels like you got to move the other lines all around.
Yeah.
Probably, right?
Yeah.
And I think what they want to see Domi with Matthews more. And I thought when Marner came back, they would just go Domi, Matthews, Marner. But again, I don't know. There's probably not enough shots on that line, right? Like that, you look at the passes that Domi's been making, and not just to Matthews, but to other people he's out there with. Like, he's all about the vision. So you can just picture a scenario where if Domi and Marner are on the same line, they're just passing and passing and passing back and forth. So maybe that's the reluctance to do that.
Yeah. What's weird is, though, I do feel as though if they do put Marner up on the top line, that, yeah, the thing that probably makes the most sense is to try Domi again at center, even though I think they know they'll never trust him in a big spot. But that, weirdly, I actually would love to see those three guys play together.
Yeah.
Like, I think that there's actually a case to be made that you could bump Bertuzzi down and then try to find McMahon some minutes down the lineup and, see how he operates back with Tavares and Nylander. And that the fit from a six standpoint might end up actually working out a little bit better for you if you were going to keep the top six loaded and just try to keep the centers as is. Okay, so this one is nobody really wants to hear this, but I think it does lend itself after this discussion, and you are somebody who knows, and you get a feel for these things. And we talked about Bertuzzi and all this, right? Because he's now at 21 goals, and he was just ripping it up and putting together a season. And we all know that he's going to be really desired because he's one of the top wingers on the market. He's one of the top players on the market. But this recent stretch of play from Max Domi as a competent first-line guy, and granted, playing with the guy who is maybe playing the best hockey on the planet right now in Austin Matthews, right? Like, he's not the MVP. It's going to go to McKinnon, and McDavid's there, and Sidney Crosby's even putting together a really compelling case. And there's Kucherov. It's a loaded field. This isn't an MVP thing. I just think that right now, Matthews is playing the best. I can't imagine anybody is playing better than he is right now. What do you think Domi's next deal looks like? Because the assumption has always been, well, he's from here, and if they'll tender him anything, he'll take it. But yeah, I gotta wonder if he would just forego getting paid at which could be, his last major contract. It is a bit of an interesting one.
For a guy that's bounced around a lot, I'm almost certain what he's looking for is term.
Yeah.
And the question, I think, for him staying in Toronto, I don't think it's out of the question. I just think that he's going to have to take less money to stay here.
No, that's no doubt. That's no doubt.
Yeah.
But will he want to stay somewhere if they say the most we're giving you is 2 years, right? Like, if you said term is important to him, of course it is, right? Like, how old is Max now? Let me just fire this into.
I want to say 29, 28.
Yeah, I was going to say he's 29 years old. This is the last one he's getting. So like the idea that he would take a 2-year deal as a 29-year-old, I'm not sure if there's other ones on the table. Like I know he wants to be a Maple Leaf. I know that he likes being a Maple Leaf. I know that would be his number one choice, but I think that we've made maybe a little bit too much of a leap in terms of, well, he'll forego, millions and millions and millions of dollars to be here.
Well, what would you pay him? I mean,
that's it.
The thing it comes to mind for me, if I'm him, you're probably looking at, I don't know, 4x4 or something like that, right? Like I think that would be, something that gives you some. Though. Yeah, it does for sure.
That really does. It seems steep for 9 goals and 45 points, and a guy that you don't trust playing down the middle.
Yep, I totally agree, and that's how he ended up in Toronto. I mean, he was looking for term and more dollars in free agency last year, and it just didn't materialize. And the thinking was, come to Toronto, play with the big guys, show what I can do, put up big numbers, and then maybe that a contract like that will be available. But the pull of Toronto, and he and Matthews are close. They got the same agent. They know each other. They both spent lots of time in Arizona. There's multiple pull factors there. So maybe there's a world where he takes less. Maybe he'll take, 3 years at 3.5 or something like that. Maybe.
See, that's the interesting one, though, to me is like, I actually think that is the scenario. Because if you're Domi, the sell point is pretty easy. It's, hey, man, you're going to continue to get an opportunity to play with Austin Matthews. That seems pretty fun, right? Like, you love passing the puck. Who would you rather pass the puck to? Okay, so that's done. 2, you felt the love of the fan base. The fans love him. Like, he's loved here. It's gone over pretty much perfectly. Fans love it that he's trying to fight, Michael Bunting. He's got true Leaf fan love. And if he parlays that into a contract that's friendly and some term that people go, no, that makes sense. Like, yeah, if the number does start with a 3, James, and you're the Leafs, I actually, offer him the 4-year deal. The question is, do you think the Leafs will actually offer this guy any term?
I'd have to look closer at. I think my recollection is they've got something like $20 million in cap space, and they've got a lot of holes. That Samson's going to be up. They're going to have big time holes on the blue line with Brody's deal coming up. Bertuzzi's money is going to come up. So there's going to be money, but there's also going to be big time needs. So if they're obviously going to need another goaltender. If it's not Samsonov, they're going to have to bring in someone else. I don't think you can go in just with Wool and a cheap veteran.
Yeah.
I think you're going to want someone who actually costs some money. You're going to want another top 4 defenseman, which in free agency, there are some names available, but they're all going to get overpaid. You're going to probably looking at, it could be like a $5 million plus there. So that $20 million disappears pretty quick. And you got to decide if you want to give up somewhere between 3.5 and 4 of that to Domi. But, I can see a world where something comes together. But again, I think it would have to be driven by him really wanting to be here and not just going for the most term and dollars that he can get. Because absolutely, if he goes to a struggling team, Chicago, San Jose, something like that, a team with tons of cap space looking to fill out their roster, he's going to get a lot more than the Leafs can afford to give him.
See, that's the another thing that's working the Leafs' favor, though, to me, is I think if you are San Jose or, Chicago, it's already been there, done that. Like, you're not doing that. I don't think that those teams are going to be in on a Max Domi, like offering him a bunch of money. To me, the proof of concept actually of this has been, if you play Max on a title contender, if you need some offense on a really good team, he has, to me anyways, solidified the idea that he can be a reliable top 6 forward. And last year, if you add the playoffs to this mix, right, of, hey, this guy's now been a big game performer, someone with a sense of the moment, someone who does have those intangibles that front offices love to pay for, he's kind of putting together a kind of compelling case. I think the whole Max Domi playing on crappy teams for big money, like that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, you put him in a role that's over his skis. We've now seen what that is. We've seen that in Montreal. Like, we've seen that at every single Max Domi spot that hasn't worked.
Yeah, he's better as a facilitator, a complimentary player, for sure. Yeah.
And so to me, for him, it's easy. Like, you should be here. It's just a real question of, what is Toronto going to offer? Will they give you term? Because to me, that's it. If you're willing to give him term, then I think that he'll take a huge haircut on the deal, or that he should, because it's a perfect situation for him. sets it up for his entire career, puts him on a title contender, put it somewhere where he matters. He gets to be around family, friends, the place that he was basically raised. Like, all of it makes a ton of sense. I just think that the point you made there about all the Leafs issues that they still need to address, all the ways that they need to fill out this roster, how do you prioritize that? You've basically got to tell him wait and see, and that sucks. Like, that nobody wants to hear that, especially after a season like this.
And I also think, too, that the playoffs is going to be a big part of this. Like, if the Leafs do go on a run and he's a big part of it, then it's going to be more likely it's a marriage that stays. It's funny you talk about his bona fides as someone that the Leafs fans love and that he loves being here. Last night I was late night looking around on YouTube, and this video came up, and it was someone was asking the Leafs players, which team do you hate the most, basically, around the league. And when they came to Domi, he did not hesitate, and he grabbed the logo, and it was the Senators logo. And it took him like half a second to say, which team do you hate the most? And he immediately started talking about the rivalry and the playoff games and, like his dad, and just like it's in his blood. It was there when he was like, how old would Max Domi have been in those series when they were playing against the Senators and Joe Nunez scoring the goals? And I mean, he was a little kid.
He would have been like 11, 12.
Yeah. And it's just like burned into his brain that, so, he's got Leafness really into his psyche, even though he's played for Montreal and he's bounced all around the league. And I do think there's a world where he has a good playoff. They go 2 or 3 rounds or something like that, and he's a factor, and they feel like they want to make him a part of this team, and maybe he finds a home for a little while.
I really hope it works. I really hope it works. I think it will. I'm kind of optimistic about it. I would say that
you want to keep Bertuzzi too, though. You want to keep everybody.
No. Here's the thing, though. I would like to keep Bertuzzi. I just know that that's not going to be likely. Like, I don't think Bertuzzi's taking a haircut, and I feel as though the Leafs' new thing is that if you want to play on the Leafs and you're not one of the core 4 guys, or core 5, depending on the Riley thing or what it is going to be moving forward, and maybe the core 4 will actually be with Riley because when Tavares enters that next contract, he's not going to be called the core 4. But I feel like the formula is pretty clear no matter what, which is you have to either sacrifice term or dollars per annum to play on this team. Like, nobody's getting overpaid other than the Stars. Stars are getting overpaid. Everybody else getting underpaid.
That's what happened with Zach Hyman. That's what happened with Zach Hyman. I mean, that was, they didn't see putting up the kind of money that Edmonton did to fit into their salary structure, and it did not work out in their favor. But there's going to be certain mercenary element to the UFA guys that they bring in, and
correct.
Bertuzzi's another guy. Went to free agency last year. It was a flat cap again, and couldn't get the offers that he was looking for. I think he probably would have liked to go back to Boston, but the number wasn't there, and did the 1-year deal to play with good players in a high-profile market and show people what he could do. And I think especially over the last, 25 games, he's definitely done that. And he's definitely put himself on the radar of teams looking for a pesky net front guy who can score 25, 30 goals.
Yes.
Because even though he's not going to get there this year, it's definitely in there. And he just was snake bitten for the first half of the year.
Yeah, no. That's just where I'm at with it, is like, I've made my peace with the idea that Bertuzzi was likely a rental. Remember the term own rental? That's what he was, but just from the outset. He was your own rental. With Domi, I just think that there's value all around for everyone. Like, nothing is going to make more sense. You're right. The playoffs matter. If he has a disastrous playoff and he can't hack it on Matthews' line and they don't produce and he gets bumped down the lineup and they can't find minutes for him. Like, of course there's a scenario where they go, you know what? That sucks. This was a really tough exit. They lost in 5 games to the Florida Panthers in the first round. Blow it up and mess with the formula again. Sure. But I just think when you look at the boxes of guy who understands what it means to be a Maple Leaf and has that in his DNA, guy who would obviously love to be here on term, guy who would absolutely take less money in order to be here on said term. I'm not saying he plays for free. I don't think that Max Domi's taking like the Giordano contract, right, at the end of his career, or Spezza contracts, where you're just foregoing all of the money to try to make sure that you're as cheap as possible. But a guy who does want to be here, a guy who does play with those intangibles, a guy who does fit with some of your better players from a personality standpoint and a style of play standpoint, like, it just makes too much sense. The only thing that sucks is what you said, which is, you have to figure out the other stuff first. And is he going to be able to sit there and wait as potentially his market gets diminished while Toronto tries to figure that out? Like, that's the tough puzzle piece in all this. Like, if I'm him, I'm going, yeah, all right. You guys want me to take less money to be here, but also you're not just going to hand that over to me right away because you might need to give it to a defenseman. Okay. You might need to give it to a different center who's basically going to take my ice time. All right. Like that's the tricky part in all of this. Everything is right except for the timing of the deal, unless he was to take something that's like a really stupid contract for him. But I just don't think that he's going to go that far with it because of the age and the pedigree. That's it. That's the way to summarize it.
I think that what the Leafs should do, that they could do that's a bit outside the box with players like this, is offer more term. Like, what if you go longer term than people would think to do with someone who's not a core piece? And we've seen this in the past. Like, I think
4 years is that, though, to me, with him.
Yeah, but what if you get more back on the average annual value if you go even longer than that?
But what's longer? Like, you can't go 6 years with a 30-year-old Max Domi. Like, that's not possible.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I was thinking 29, and then I don't know when his birthday was, but
yeah, neither do I.
We've seen it. Tampa's done it a little bit with some of their guys. I know they were trying to keep Killorn and do some sort of 7-year deal with the AAV coming way down. And I think that if the Leafs are going to keep Tavares, I think that's what they need to do. And he's going to be old, and people are going to be like, why are they giving him so many years? And it's like, but what if you can get the number way down?
Yeah.
Then you're not really worried, because those last 2 years are probably going to end up on LTIR, or you can buy them out, or you can trade them, right?
Yeah, and I think
that's what I would do. And there's some risk there on the backside.
Yeah.
But, 4 years from now with Domi, you can maybe retain $1 million of it and you move it or something like that, right? So, and you get the near-term benefit. The cap's going to go up. I don't know. I feel like it's easy enough to move money that you're not going to get burned, especially if the AAV isn't that high.
Yeah, you know what? Maybe it is 5 years. He did just turn 29. He turned 29 in March. I just Googled it. So, yeah, he's not the 29, 30. He's a young 29. He'll be 30 at the end of next season. So, yeah, maybe 5. If you offered Max Domi 5 years and he really did take a haircut, but he was like, yep, you're going to be a Leaf. You're going to be here. Hell, you even give him everybody gets a no move clause on this team anyway, so why not give it to him? So who cares? They hand those things out like candy, like, yeah, whatever. Take whatever you want. You guys control the team. We'll make no trades. We won't be able to do anything if we don't like the team. But yeah, I think maybe that is the path forward. Is unlike the other guys who have taken the short term deals, the bet on yourself deals, but they've gotten the millions that Trey Living already signed, and Benoit and McMahon, that Domi goes the other way, where he says, you know what, I'll only get paid a couple $1 million, but it's going to be over 5 and I'm a Leaf forever, and I get all the bona fides. And, maybe he just looks at it and says, yeah, I'm not at the end of my career like Spezza and like Giordano are, but those two guys being completely beloved by, well, Spezza kind of torched his, but the way that they were perceived during the playing career at the end, like there is real value to that beyond just like money. And I think Max understands that. Okay, last one. Robertson scores again. I call him scratch and score because that's basically what he does, is he gets scratched and then he scores goals. But they're always like in low leverage, and it's the same discussion around him basically every time, where you're like, okay, yeah, like he's fine. And I guess he scores and he does get goals, but ultimately you don't really trust him. And he's done better for himself this year, but how much better? What do you think Robertson has done for himself this season with this organization?
I think that he's shown he's an NHL player.
Okay.
He's still
though after you said it, you're like, kinda, because he is. But...
Well, yeah, but I think he's shown that, like, he's not, people used to say like he was a, what do you call it, quadruple A or whatever, that this guy's going to be a really good AHLer, and I don't think that that's true. I mean, you don't put up 24 points in 51 games, or I guess that's, I think before last night, what he had, 25 points in 52 games.
Sure.
When you're 22 years old, if you're an AHL player, that's not what he is. But can he be a top 9 forward who gets you 20 goals and 40 points on a good team? And that I still don't know. I still don't know if he's always going to just be, like, you look at it, when Yarncroc comes back, it feels like the most likely person to come out is Robertson, because you can't really play him on that fourth line with Camp. And Yarncroc, you don't want on the fourth line either. So you're not going to take out McMahon. You're not going to take out Nyes. There's not really anyone else to take out. So it feels like Robertson's going to be the one, unless they decide not to play Reeves, which I don't see against Florida. I think Reeves is for sure going to be in.
Yeah, I think Reeves is in, and the only way that he's out is if they're trailing a series. Like
so I guess you could sit Connor Dewar if you really feel strongly about Robertson, but it just feels like Robertson is like injury insurance. I think what he's established with this team is that you get him on a cheap next contract and you bring him back next year, and maybe you've got a hole punch for him to play a little bit more so that he's not in and out of the lineup. I'm pretty sure he'll require waivers next year, so you're not going to be able to bounce him up and down. So you got to make some sort of commitment that he's one of your top 13 forwards.
Yeah. See, that's the part where it gets tricky still for me. It's really it's very strange, and maybe part of it is that he got too much hype already, and that's how it works in this market is you get a lot of hype and then you don't live up to it right away and then you're just dead to everyone. So
he's still so young. But people were writing him off when he was like 20 years old, and he was putting up good big numbers in the AHL. And I think the hype was overextended because I think he's probably best case scenario a good third line player in the NHL, and that's probably what he's going to be.
Yeah, that you're right. The hype
EP2 and.
Yeah, but again, all of this feels fair and all of this feels right, what you're saying. And yet I'm remarkably unexcited about that idea. You know what I'm saying? Like there is just something about it where I actually could see Nick Robertson going to like Nashville and he's that and it works. But yet there is something to me about, it's the same thing with Domi, where some guys in this market, it just feels like they work and Domi is the maximum of that. And there is something about Nick Robertson underneath it all that even though the shot is nice and the ability is there and the things you said are probably right, that he's a solid third-line guy and he may score 20 goals one year on a cheap contract and all that sounds lovely, and yet I can't get over how my gut feels about it, and that is I don't think he should be here long-term. I know it's just dumb. It sounds dumb, but it's how I feel. I really don't. And I don't think most people would disagree with me. Like, no one would be heartbroken if he got moved to Nashville for a third-round pick.
No, I just think that would be silly to do right now before you can see if he continues to progress and continue to grow, because this year's been a step forward for him. What if next year's another step forward, and then all of a sudden you're thinking about him a little bit differently? And I think part of what works against him is what we were talking about. Like he needs a better center to play with. When you play in that third line, if they can address that, I think that in an ideal world, Robertson is on like a sheltered scoring third line, which the Leafs can't really build right now. They don't have the personnel to do it. But that's on a team like, say Nashville, he could build a sheltered scoring third line, and he's got enough tools that he could contribute there. And Robertson's still figuring out the defensive side of things. He's still figuring out positioning. He's never going to be the fastest guy. He's never going to be the biggest guy. He's got some strikes against him, but he's also got a skill set where it's hard to put up the offense that he has at this young of an age. And I'm not ready to write him off yet. And to do it for a third round pick, it doesn't make sense to me. I would want to see him for another season.
I hate feeling like I am writing him off. I'm not trying to write off his career, but I'm shockingly close to writing off a guy as a Leaf who, they put up that graphic yesterday of his goals per game amongst the Leafs and I'm like, it's like the most impressive yet least impressive stat ever, like any other 22-year-old former Leaf, and people are freaking out about that. And him, I look at it and go, come on, we all know. Everybody knows. A guy with that stat, James, on the Toronto Maple Leafs, a team that has struggled for secondary scoring year over year, cheap secondary scoring, and yet everyone basically is saying, yeah, but you would clearly play Ryan Reeves in his age, 37 season over this guy to start a play. You'd clearly play Connor Dewar over him in a playoff series, without.
He's not a finished product, though.
I'm not saying he is, but I think he's closer to it.
Because he's not in the playoff lineup for Game 1 doesn't mean that next year we feel differently about where he's at.
Maybe, but I will say,
I think the hype train's his ceiling has got to be kept at what it is.
You had it right. You had it right, but that's a good player.
It is, it can be a useful player for sure, especially if he continues to evolve. I mean, look at the players that look at McMahon, what he turns into at 28 years old, and Hyman. People got to stop thinking of 22-year-olds as finished products.
No, but I will say this, okay? So, and because even with Fraser Minton, right? He's a first-round pick, and he's an important future piece of the franchise. But what's the hopeful ceiling, right? Third-line player, which is what we're saying with Nick Robertson. So you're going, yeah, if you can get a third-line player that scores 20 goals, like, that's a good pick. That is a good pick. That is a good job. That is a good job by your developmental system. What I will say about Nick Robertson, and this is the part that is tough but true. When you're talking about that sheltered scoring line, the difference between him and Bobby McMahon and Nyes, right? Nyes another second-round pick who might not even score as many goals as Nick Robertson does in the course of regular season or scores something close to him. Bobby McMahon, same thing, might not score as many goals as Nick Robertson. Can't teach size, and it does have value, and it does change what you're able to do. Like, you can throw those guys on different lines and give them different looks, whereas with Robertson, it's like there's only one type of line he can be on, and it's what you outlined, which is like the sheltered third scoring line where he does get the power play too. Like, all the things need to break perfectly for him, and I guess that's the part of it that sticks with me is I'm like, yeah, but that's not this team. That's not Sheldon Keefe. That's not what it is around this core four, and that's maybe why it doesn't fit more than anything else.
Yeah, but I mean, you get into the playoffs, and if you go 2-3 rounds and you have a couple forwards get hurt, or next season, if you got, they haven't
but
had
I don't
a lot of
think
injuries
he's happy
up
with that
front the
anymore.
way they have one.
Yeah,
it could be.
Yeah,
it could be.
Well,
but you just say, like, I think that's why it's not a long-term marriage. It's like one more year, and let's see how it goes.
Yeah. All right, I'm fine with that. One more year. One more year. Everyone wants the Nick Robertson encore. That's what we've all settled on.
I think you're wrong, too. I don't think the whole fan base is down on him. I see a lot of, every time he scores, I see a lot of, and people talking about that they want to see more of him. And
you just follow Nick Richard on Twitter. That's the only guy that's like obsessed with him and won't quit. So that's it.
The other thing that I keep hearing about Robertson is that he's just got an engine, and he just is so competitive, and his off season is like he's a guy who just eats and breathes and sleeps hockey, and he's going to do whatever he can to get better. And I bet on that.
Yeah, and you've spoken to him, right?
Yes.
Yeah, he gets it. Like, he is a gets it guy. Enjoyable kid to speak with, mature beyond his years, intelligent, thoughtful, hard worker. He's all the things I like. And yet I can't get there. I can't get there with the long-term stuff. It is very strange. It is very, very weird. Okay, actual last thing. Why don't we care more about the Leafs chasing Florida? Why is this a complete non-factor story? Why is this you got to remind people that it's even a thing?
I guess people just don't care if you're the second or third seed. It doesn't really, it doesn't make a huge difference in the NHL. Like that home ice is not, it's like the difference between being a 51% favorite or a 49% underdog. Like it just doesn't seem to make a huge difference. And fans have also seen the Leafs go in with home ice in the first round and lose, and go in without it and lose. So, it's I don't know. Do you think it's a big deal? I mean, I don't.
Here's what I think.
I guess if it gets to Game 7, I guess. But the Leafs have played really well. It's like they set the record this year for wins on the road, right? So I think that's the other thing, too, is that the Leafs don't have home ice advantage the way that some other teams do. Like the building, even in the playoffs, is not – it gets tense, right? There's a lot of people sitting on their hands.
That's a real thing. I do think that the building gets better when it is playoff time than during regular season. But still, in the tense moments, I think you can feel it, and I believe in that energy bleeding onto the hockey team, and especially this hockey team, because we've seen it. Two, though, is it is funny to me that we don't talk about it at all when we spend so much time worrying about matchups, right? It's like, oh, well, how will Keats match up? It's like, well, isn't that the point of home ice? And then the other is everyone always talks about how it's like playoff hockey comes down to these small percentages, and it's one bounce here and it's one bounce there. And we do know factually that home ice teams do win more in these series. So it's like, it's not worth nothing. It is worth a couple percent, but in if you're saying the differences between like Ryan Reeves and Robertson, and we spend all this time talking about them, is maybe a percent. It's like, why wouldn't home ice be a percent? And so if you're asking me, I would say the Leafs are just in a weird spot because of that home ice thing, the tense thing, like that matters to me. The fact that they have had the ghosts, whatever, the idea that they could play looser on the road to start it or play looser on the road to close it. But for a team that we've talked about not having enough matchups correctly, it is a bit strange to me. And I think the greater conversation might end up actually being, I know that we do this all the time, but this does feel a little bit more tipping point-ish to me when it comes to the playoff format. Like if Boston and Tampa play each other in the first round, and, whoever gets the Penguins crawling in, or maybe the Penguins are hot, maybe that changes things, but like Islanders or, Detroit,
Well, there could be two bad Metro teams, right?
That's what I'm saying. It's just like
yeah.
there's crap teams there, and then you're like looking at the Atlantic, and these guys got to go to war in the first round, while the Metro is like, yeah, it's actually our better teams won because they got good friendly matchups.
The Atlantic's been the best division in the NHL like 8 of the last 9 years.
Yeah.
Like when the Leafs were that underdog up-and-coming team with the 7 rookies in Matthews' first year, you were looking around like, oh, man, the Atlantic's stacked. And then the next year they had to play Boston the first round. And then the next year they had to play Boston the first round. And they've had to play Tampa multiple times. The Atlantic is just stacked.
Yeah.
And this year it's the best division by far. Yeah. The playoff format's got to go. I mean, it's like 5 years overdue that it's got to go.
I know, but that's the thing is I feel like this year it might be more so because everyone cries when it's Toronto, right? Like here, but then it doesn't seem like the NHL cares because they go, no, we've already got Toronto. We already know how important you guys are to the actual bottom, like the bottom line, but we never treat you as such, which is one of the worst things about the NHL. That they just feels like year over the year they don't actually care about Toronto, even though. Like, I was thinking about this the other night. Like, it's like a good merit question. Do you think there's more Leaf fans than all the other fan bases in Canada combined?
I don't think I'd go that far because look how big Montreal.
Sure.
Vancouver's fan base is massive too. Like,
But 40% of the population of this country resides in Ontario, and the vast majority of Leaf fans. And like, you go around the country, it's like you live in Toronto. I don't know Canucks fans, like unless they're from Vancouver. But you go to Vancouver and there's lots of Leaf fans, right?
Yeah.
And they're either transplants or they had a parent who was from there and they were raised on it. Anyway,
I just think it's closer to what you're saying than I think a lot of people would think. Like the Leaf fan base is just massive.
That's what I'm saying.
Sure.
It's huge. Yeah. It's huge. And
I mean, we see it on our site. Like we can see how many people are looking at each team, and the Leafs are just like a juggernaut. It's massive.
Yes. So I guess my point where I was going with this though is, if this negatively impacts Boston's market 2 years in a row, right? Like if they lose the Boston Bruins in 2 straight seasons because they had to play 2 teams from Florida that aren't going to drive ratings, and you're going to kill a Golden Goose franchise with 2 Florida teams 2 years in a row because you gave them difficult matchups, I feel like that one is where they're maybe going to go, ooh, that was dumb. That was bad. We should try to make it easier for the team like Boston that finishes at the top of the standings to stay relevant rather than have this kind of apathy set in. Because you don't want to have their fans being like, who cares, right? You don't have Boston sports fans being like, who cares?
If they get a first-round series that's Islanders-Rangers, the league's going to love that. Yeah. If they get Bruins-Leafs in the second round, they're going to love that. So there's like some of those.
Yeah, guess what?
That's what
they've been hoping for that every year, and they never get it. They're like, maybe this is the year we're finally going to get, and then they never do. It's like, and then the thing that they've never figured out with any of this, which is the stupidest part of it all, is that, hey guys, you know what people care about in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs? Anybody playing anybody. Like it's the best thing. It doesn't matter who you play. You don't need to build the rivalries off the first round. And anyways, it's going to probably fall that way sometimes, no matter what. So just go back to 1 through 8. For the love of God, go back through 1 through 8. James, thanks as always for the time, brother. I appreciate it. Talk to you next week.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, JD.
See you, buddy. James Mirtle, Senior Managing Editor at The Athletic.